Hi, everybody. This is Daniel Jude, and I am joined by Dr. David Hartman. He has his master's in sociology and in counseling, and also a PhD in counseling and in education. So I wanted to bring him into a conversation. At our Anchor and Anthem event, we talked a lot about what's happening to us and a lot of the things that's sort of disrupting our world externally, and then the impact it's having on us. But for a lot of us, I think, in conversations I have, there's a desire to dive a little bit deeper on the front end of that conversation, the fears and the anxieties and the what's really happening in me as I process this kind of season. So I've invited Dr. Hartman, who I will hereforto call David, for intimacy and familiarity. I invited him to come on and really explore this sort of what's happening in me idea a little more deeply for us and with us. So, David, you want to introduce yourself and tell us anything I missed?
You gave me a lot of plaudits there, Daniel. So thank you for that. Cleaned me up pretty nice. Yep, I have a background, like you said, in sociology and counseling. And did my undergrad in psychology, so kind of all around social and behavioral science. Right now, what I do for work, people may find interesting, maybe not. I'm a trainer. I travel the country training nonprofit frontline workers who are helping people get out of poverty. So that's my gig, well, actually that I lost due to COVID. And I also have a career counseling and coaching practice called Clear Path Career.
Awesome. How can people find you at Clear Path Career before we get started?
Well, get a pen because it's a long URL, but it's www.clearpathcareercoaching.com.
Clearpathcareercoaching.com. Awesome.
Yep.
So find David there. If you email him and start your email with David, it costs less than if you start your email with Dr. Hartman. Is that right?
Oh, yes, significantly less. 3 to 4%. Yeah, off the top immediately, just by calling me David. Yep.
Well, that's not going to repair what we've lost in our retirement accounts, but if we can save the 3 or 4%, then we will.
Take it where you can.
Hey, let's dive in. The title for this webinar is Micro Losses, How Our Brains Might Be Tricking Us or Robbing Us from the Opportunity to Grieve. And so I wanted to start. Clearly, we're going to talk about grief through this conversation, but micro loss may be a new term for a lot of people, and I wanted you just to unfold that idea a little bit at the outset. What's micro loss?
So I'll own that I may have made this up. But we're pretty familiar with this point at the idea of micro things, micro hyphen something, microaggression, micro loans, whatever it be. Micro just meaning small, not non-existent, but just the idea that during this time, this pandemic time, a lot of us have lost things that in aggregate, as you pile them up, may be pretty significant, but each individual sense of loss may be pretty small. So I think we've undergone a lot of these micro losses, whether it be loss of a sense of place, sense of routine, sense of predictability, sense of competence, feeling like we're good at something. You may be, a great construction worker or receptionist or surgeon or, surgeons are probably still working for non-elective surgeries, but you may be kind of crap at homeschool, right? So losing a sense that you're competent at something in your world and maybe having to flex and do something that you don't feel like you're as good at.
Yeah.
That can be a loss for sure. So the idea that we just have probably, maybe if we haven't even experienced a large loss of even income or loss of life or loss of health, we've all lost something in this time.
Yeah. And I heard, I just want to pull this out quickly. I heard you say loss of place. I know that's hitting both of us. I know that you're a coffee shop early morning addict, and you don't get to do that anymore, and that's a big deal for you.
Yeah.
I make a living by being in the room with people, so the financial impact of that is real, and doesn't feel maybe as micro. But as I'm hearing you say loss of place, I'm realizing part of that loss for me is not just the income. It's I make my money by being in the room with people, but I get my energy by being in the room with people. And I find my sense of place and my position within the community in the community.
Yeah.
And that has been a real loss that I've started to realize over the last couple of weeks is I'm desperate to be around people because I really love people. And it's getting harder and harder not to.
I've caught myself staring at my suitcase longingly in my closet because I travel a week at a time for work, and that's where I get to go do the thing that brings me energy and I feel good at, and I don't get to do it anymore. Yeah. Silly, but I've been casting longing glances at my suitcase.
How's that for a humanizing moment on video? Dr. Hartman gazing longingly at his carry-on. Well, I guess the question then is, great, we affirm that we're experiencing micro loss. So what? Why aren't we processing that in a productive way like we would if it wasn't so micro? What's robbing us of the inability to process those losses just because they happen to be small?
I think some of it, a lot of it, just the world around us. We often, our brains are comparison machines. So we have our own peculiarities in the West. Maybe other cultures are doing this a little bit better. But I know one of the things that we're always comparing to now, if you look at the news, we see a death tally rise every day, right? We see people who are infected that have been tested or manifested symptoms, and people who have died from complications from coronavirus. And if you're not in one of those categories, you're like, oh, by comparison, my brain is saying, I should be grateful. I'm really lucky. Anything I've lost pales in comparison to that, to the point where it's not even worth really giving a second active thought. So I think that that frame of reference is so distorted right now because there is so much staggering loss, whether it be financial or physical, that any of these sort of smaller things just are rendered by our higher order minds, the reflective part of our minds, as we just discount them. We're cognitively discounting them as not being worth anything.
My inability to go to the coffee shop doesn't matter because Susan's grandmother has died.
Yes. So in that part of our brain, we go to, okay, let's just go to the bright side, count your blessings, be grateful, practice gratitude. And that's not all bad, but it's not the only part of our brain either. So the other part of our brain works on sort of memory, right? Habit. Most of the things you do, you probably, if you brushed your teeth this morning, did not have to YouTube 5 videos on how to do it. You probably just did it. It's muscle memory. You may not even remember that you did. You may have gotten to work today if you drove somewhere or gone to the grocery store. Do you ever drive somewhere and not remember driving there? It's pretty scary, but our brain, part of our brain runs that way, and it makes us able to function. So some of that's been taken away right now. And a lot of these micro losses happen at that level where our brain is trying to make sense of things without all of the things that it has to rely on typically in terms of routine, access to pleasure, access to relationships, access to places like we were talking about.
Yeah. So I hear you saying 2 things at once, which I think is such an important part of growth and development, is embracing kind of a both and. Very few things in the world are either or.
Correct.
Really. And the both and I hear you saying is, yes, practice gratitude. Sure. Yes, be thankful for what you haven't lost or what you do have. Find joy in those things. And so gratitude and grief. That your micro loss, whether it's 1 or 20 in aggregate, matters because you have lost something. And if you pretend you haven't, that's when you get this growth stagnation of like the inside, right?
It's a disintegration. So if part of your brain is actually trying to make sense of things and grieving micro losses, and another part of your brain is just saying, no, be grateful, discounting that, and then saying, hey, we should focus on this time on personal growth or something else, and just sort of move past that because I'm resilient, I'm tough, we're actually disintegrated. Part of your brain is in free fall or trying to like look for certainty or surety or predictability at every step. And the part that you can actually sort of consciously work with is discounting that. That's disintegration. And grief will out in some way. It'll show up in terms of emotion. You think of the stages of grief from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. I mean, you can, some people quibble with them, but as you could almost plot yourself on a grief curve. I think we all could right now. We've probably seen some element of her 5 stages of denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. And if you can't, you can look at your social media feed or to someone in your family and see them.
Yeah.
We all see the anger that some people have. We all see the bargaining. If I just wear this protective equipment, or if I do this, or if I keep 8 feet away or 6 feet away, I can go about my normal life and everything should be open. And, how dare they? And, or just depression. I've eaten a lot of fattening food and sugary food during this time, more than I have normally.
Yeah.
Maybe a little bit of depression there, Daniel, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's it. If we're not in touch with these micro losses for what they are, we're in a place of disintegration within our mind, and we need to bring the active part of our mind, the conscious part of our mind, to be aware of those losses so we can integrate through grief.
And it strikes me that part of that disintegration, where we've got 2 different parts of our brain kind of in battle about, hey, this is reality. No, this is reality. And they're kind of meeting at this edge. In the middle of that edge or that boundary zone for me is guilt a lot of times, right? That I feel guilty for wanting to grieve, not getting to go to the coffee shop when my brain is saying you should, or my heart is saying you should. My higher level brain is saying you shouldn't. And then I feel guilty because I'm so lucky.
Yeah.
And now not only am I not grieving, I'm actively sort of shaming myself. So it's kind of a 2-for-1 deal on the negative end of that.
Yeah, and the point is not that we don't have to pivot during this time, right? So we have to pivot. Like, life has presented us with something. Denial is one of the stages of grief, like I said. So you can deny that anything has changed and anything has to change. You're just going to soldier on as normal. Nothing's different. Obviously, that's not true. Whatever your response would be, we need to recognize it, and we do need to pivot. We have no choice but to pivot, but we can't pivot and flex around grief and circumvent it and just try to go around it. There's no helicopter over it, and there's no tunnel you can dig underneath it. The only way to do grief is to go through it. And I think grief is upsetting for a few reasons. Grief acknowledges that a way of life that you previously cherished or found comforting is probably not available to you. And the end point of grief, I'm going to borrow something here. I'm going to borrow a framework from a different frame of reference. There's a spiritual writer named Richard Rohr. I don't know if you're familiar with him. A lot of people may not be, but he talks about sort of spiritual upheaval and grieving a sense of spiritual place and certainty. And he talks about 3 boxes. He talks about the box of order, the box of disorder, and then on the other side of that, on the far right, if you're reading left to right, would be reordering. So order, disorder, reorder. We have all been thrust somewhat to one extent or another into the disorder box. Whatever order our life was in has sharply fallen into disorder for a lot of us, or mildly in other areas. This disorder you can read as those micro losses. Things are disordered because of the micro losses we've experienced. And when in time of uncertainty, all we want to do is get back to what we knew before. So, and all this talk of growth and self-actualizing and getting 6-pack abs and taking this seminar or maybe learning Mandarin, there's all kinds of things on offer because, people are trying to make money during this time too.
Yeah.
Which I don't fault people for. Self-improvement is okay, but under the ordered part of life that we used to experience, maybe that's taking a value or a set of priorities that were important then that aren't important in this moment. Grief changes priorities. One, your brain doesn't have the bandwidth to go after those things with the same fervor and intensity, so we need to cut ourselves some slack in terms of productivity expectations in order to grieve. That may feel comfortable for you, where you're like, when life goes down, I just work harder. unless you're doing the kind of work which often, grief work often looks like passivity, but that's the kind of work you need to do. You actually need to sit with your grief. That is grief work. It's not chopping wood. It's not building spreadsheets. It's not, gardening or something else necessarily, something that might require exertion. A lot of us are trying to get back to that first place, the way things were. But when disruption comes, when grief comes, what we should be really thinking about is how our life will be reordered. It doesn't mean it will be permanently in disorder, but it's going to be ordered differently on the other side of grief. And I think should be an encouraging word. So don't hear that as a word of fear. That can include personal growth, but maybe from a different vantage point than how life used to be, where it was just about getting six-pack abs or stacking up accomplishments or this or that. Actually, it's one of my biggest prayers and hopes is that we as a society come out of this with a little bit different, reordered set of values, sensibilities, just some humanity and decency. I'm hoping that. So I just want to put that frame on it. On the other side of grief is not exactly the way things were before. It's order, but it is reordered order.
Yeah. So if I'm sort of plotting this along a series of steps, step one is acknowledge the micro loss and that it matters. Step two, I heard you saying, is expect less of myself, maybe that.
Absolutely.
Not in a I don't matter anymore or what I do doesn't matter, but in a my priorities are getting reordered. Yes. And that's okay. So I expect less of the production or performance that I might have expected when things used to be, because now things are. Yeah. And then they will be, and will be isn't necessarily the same as used to be. So I expect less of myself. I create space for myself to feel my feelings about all the micro losses I'm experiencing. What do I do in that space as I'm making that space to feel all my feelings? What do I do there?
I think it's really important to really dig up and access some of those, like the part of our brain that runs on habit and predictability and consistency and being able to project what the next step will be. And maybe if that's been taken away from us, we need to sit down and actually kind of chronicle those things. And I would say, you can do that orally with a loved one, but say it out loud or write it down. So the sort of more reflective part of your brain can see what the rest of your brain is going through and grieving. And just really take stock and give time and really think about what it is about those things that feels important to you. And put names to that. What was important about that to you? What did you lose? I know for me, competence is a big value. I have started 3 jobs in 3 weeks because I lost my income. I am not competent at any of them yet. That is a big loss for me. And unless I remind myself that I'm not going to be as good at 3 new jobs as I was at the one that I've been doing for years and getting plaudits for, I'm just going to get angry. I'm going to get sad. I'm not going to want to perform. I'm going to be defensive at work. So look at the value behind those, the thing that you find important about them. That's important to hold on to, what you found important about them, because you can find those things in other ways going forward too. Yeah.
So chronicling your loss. I don't get to go to the coffee shop anymore, and writing that down and writing that and writing why that matters. I've lost my sense of place. I've lost my sort of sense of community. I've lost this friendship because I met someone there twice a week. I've lost this creative thinking space I've developed. Whatever it is you've lost, write it out so that you see, like what you said, the values that you have. So now the values are the things that are getting centered in my reflective mind, rather than just the anger at being told I can't go to my coffee shop anymore.
Bingo.
Yeah. And I know you've talked about before, just the value of saying those things out loud to allow other people to hear them, not just yourself.
Not just ourselves.
Because you talk about grief as not exclusively, but as a kind of a community process as well.
Yeah, it doesn't feel real unless somebody else can attest to it and see it. Because grief feels invisible. Not only can it be in our disintegrated mind, almost blind to us, But even if we're just writing it down and processing it with ourselves, someone else may not know what we're going through either. Like if it's news to us, it may be news to them as well. And the way through grief is with someone holding your hand or with an arm around you. The way to get through it best is to get through it with somebody else. We all know that when we experience a physical loss, maybe a loss of a friend or a spouse or a child, parent, that it feels good to have someone around us who knew them too, that can attest to our sense of loss. They know the particularity of our loss. And that born collectively somehow upholds the value of the thing you lost. It's not discounted, but it also is like, I'm seen in that. And there's something in that is transformative of grief into something where you can actually process the emotion of it that's sad and not just stay at sort of anger or bargaining or depression. You can get at the underlying emotion by being seen and giving somebody else the chance in this time to really be there for you as well, and for you to be there for somebody else's grief. That's something I'm missing as well.
Yeah. So I've affirmed the importance of my micro loss. I've started chronicling those and exploring the value systems that I've got in place, and maybe sharing those with a loved one or a trusted friend or an advisor. So what? I was disintegrated and angry, and now I'm good to go? Closure? Am I done? I'm being facetious, but
yeah.
What is our expectation in this process?
We love to talk about closure, and because that's cognitive control, basically saying if something has hurt me in the past, made me feel a way out of control, I can reclaim control and it can no longer harm me going forward. That's not the way reality works. That's the way we would like to imprint on reality.
Yeah.
So I think that the more realistic goal is to go for integration. Integrating it into our story going forward, making sure we have the value extracted from it so we can say what the value was that we're grieving, that we're feeling sad about, and then being able to contextualize that going forward as a part of our life. Just like, if one of us, Daniel and I, are both married people, if we lost our spouse, we wouldn't just have a period of grieving that was sort of 2 to 3 months or 4 months and then say, I'm good, I will remarry, and that person has made no inroads into my ongoing psyche, sense of self, consciousness, values, aesthetic, memories. Closure doesn't work that way. We carry everybody through everything. It's just the perspective and size and shape and lessons that they carry along with us. And Corona is going to teach us some things as well. We're not just going to reopen the economy and be like, well, that was weird. That was like a weird bender I went on for like 6 to 8 weeks or months. Who knows at this point? Yeah. No, some things will have happened during this time. And we want to be able to integrate those and not just say, well, that was Corona, now we're done. Things are happening. So we just want to be able to put those into our story going forward and integrate those. As opposed to getting closure. I think closure is largely a myth. We can get peace, but it doesn't mean that something won't matter anymore or doesn't have an impact. We just have handles to put around it and a frame to sort of understand it.
Yeah. Yeah. So the way things were don't stop mattering, even though we're in a new order, a reorder.
Correct.
But we're always going to hurt ourselves or damage our ability to be fully integrated and present if we try to pretend that the way things were didn't matter and didn't create us. One of my friends often says, what happened and who I was and what I did got me here, and that's great, but it won't get me there, whatever that there is. And that it reminds me of this: the way things were, great, not the way things are going to be, and I have to make peace with that instead of fight that reality. Remind us, if people have found value in this conversation, remind us how they can get in touch with you if they want to kind of continue to explore their personal experience of this and continue to get some guidance from you. Yeah,
I'm happy. I'm having conversations now with people about what this means for their career going forward, and maybe grieving the loss of one, but also seeing what they really value and how that could roll into a different look. And then just through the counseling side, this is a hard time. So Don't go through it alone. If you don't have someone to talk to that you trust, please do seek out a counselor, even if it's not me. You can find me on the web at www.clearpathcareercoaching.com. And I believe my email through there is clearpathcareercoaching.com. That's a mouthful. I'm sorry.
And if anybody wants to get in touch with David, feel free to get in touch with me, and I'll easily pass your information over to him. So, David, I just want to thank you for helping us make some sense of seasons of uncertainty and what's happening in us, not just to us, for affirming grief and loss that we might be feeling, and creating some frameworks to think about that. So thanks so much for spending time with us.
Thanks, Daniel. It's been really fun.
All right. Talk soon.